I'm Rachel Horgan. Join me each episode as I sit down with a guest co-host covering the latest business stories in the Seattle area. We'll read the news so you don't have to. This is The Weekly. Okay, hey everybody, welcome back. I've been thinking about 2025 and what do I want to do with this podcast, and I'm kind of contemplating what kind of guests to have on, just kind of what I want to do in the next year. So if you have feedback, some things that you're liking that we're doing, things that you're not, and just maybe tell me in the nicest, gentlest possible way, because I'm a recovering people pleaser. But you can email me at info@theweeklyseattle.com, or you can DM me on Instagram at theweeklyseattle. Other housekeeping notes is that I think I'm going to skip next week. I just feel like there's some important things happening in the world. I just, with the election coming up and no matter what happens, I'm not sure if we're going to be tuning into a podcast. But anyway, you'll see that on Instagram. Okay. Welcome to King 5. That was terrible. I got to do that again. We are here at King 5 because I'm with Jake Whittenberg, the morning news anchor. Hello.
Hey. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I got to practice my TV voice.
It's pretty good, though. Good job.
Thank you. So you've been at King for about 15 years.
Yeah.
And prior to that, you were a reporter and anchor in Columbus, Ohio. And before that, in Billings, Montana. So it's always been in your blood, yeah?
Yeah. No, 20 years in the business. And my dad was a newspaper publisher. My mom was a reporter. And so sort of was raised in the business, and went into the newsrooms on election night, and it's just always been in my blood. I just love it.
Yeah, very cool. And so I said that you do the morning show. How long have you been awake?
Oh my goodness. At the time we're taping right now, it's been almost 10 hours, and it's noon. So alarm clock goes off at 2:00 in the morning, but I've been doing this for 12 years on the morning show.
Yeah.
So I've kind of got like a nice family unit built around Dad's weird schedule. So I think we're good. I got a 10 and a 12-year-old. Mom kind of tucks us all in at the same time every night.
That's so
get
funny.
our sleep, yeah.
And then you and I met when I was running the 40 Under 40 program. Yeah. And this was during COVID. And I remember when I interviewed you, you had the best virtual setup we'd ever seen. It was like your audio was so crisp. You had these lights. You had this green backdrop.
That's what you get when a TV guy's,
That's right.
In the 40 Under 40.
But you were running TV through your garage, right?
Right.
Because you were doing morning shows, right?
Yeah, during COVID, 187 days in my garage.
Whoa.
That was the number, without a haircut too. So, yeah, that was at the time, wasn't it?
My goodness.
Yeah, when they told us we were going to have to go possibly from home for a couple of weeks, ended up being several months. So I think all of us had our stressors. That was crazy.
Well, you won the award in my eyes of best setup. So we're going to talk a lot more about your background and your experience and all of your stuff. So we're going to dive into it. Here are the top 5 stories. We're going to talk about the role of TV news in politics. We're going to talk about Jeff Bezos, him pulling the Washington Post endorsement recently. We'll talk about a CEO who was accused of fraud and how he skipped town. And then we'll talk about the Boeing workers denying the offer. And lastly, we're going to talk about a new semi-pro Ballard soccer team. Are you ready to get into it, Jake?
Let's do it.
Okay. So we kind of talked a little bit about why you got into this field. Is there anything else you want to share about why journalism and TV news is so important to you?
I think it's important to me, but I think it's just so important to all of us. Mm-hmm. And it's the only constitutionally protected occupation, journalism. It's the only occupation that's named in the Constitution. And it's because the framers knew how important journalism is to democracy. I mean, on the front page of the New York Times, Washington Post, journalism dies in darkness. I think there's a real truth to that. So that kind of fuels us in this newsroom. We have a great news director who helps remind us of those kinds of things all the time, of how important we are. And I think especially at a time like today, it's important to have observations, not opinions, in certain news outlets like ours, and to be as unbiased and neutral as we can, and to be just truth seekers. And I think it's so important for a society and for all of us to have a healthy newsroom like ours, to have a healthy, broadcast sort of sector, and to have people like journalists looking out for all of us.
Yeah.
I think it just keeps us going. It's so important to society.
Well, let's talk about that. So we obviously know nationally Fox News leans more right, CNN leans more left. How do you approach politics here at your news station? And I looked at your Twitter and I couldn't tell one way or the other what your politics are, but you were reporting on politics. And so, how do you walk that line?
Well, I think, in some instances, facts speak truth. And we talk about truth seeking here in the newsroom. And, we as a newsroom, and just newsrooms in general, it was built on this idea of vetting facts, of being truth seekers, challenging the truth, coming up with what we as a collective body of journalists think is the truth. And that's kind of how I see my job, is always trying to find out what is really the truth here in this particular story. That's what's in my head. And I also think it's important to, be unbiased. And I think there's, of course, they used to say, don't let the facts get in the way of your opinions, right? But I think,
heard that.
I think we all start from a position of understanding something, because we're all affected in our lives and by different things and different, things happening in society. And so we come from that part of our own truth, and it's about finding out how this affects everybody. And so a newsroom to me it's a collective body. And that's why I think a lot of what you're seeing in the industry today is a lot of independent journalists. They might work by themselves. They work alone. They're often siloed. And I think that's when you start to get into trouble, because you don't have this collection of experiences. You don't have a collection of a diverse body of people that can kind of vet what's happening in an understandable way. And I think you're seeing the fracturing, the balkanization of our industry because of this sort of separation that we're all experiencing. I think it's better to be together.
Yeah. What about like opinion shows? You mentioned about opinion being part of news. Obviously nationally, again, there's some big opinion shows. Do you feel like there's a place for that in TV news? Do you feel like it should be separate? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I do. I think that, as we've seen with the Jeff Bezos story, which I know we'll get into, there are certain opinions that are allowed to be, right? I mean, the newspapers have had, my dad loved his opinion editors in the newspaper business. He'd go talk to them. And I think the editorial board of these organizations is like the molten core of who these organizations are. And so, I think it's important to have an editorial board, an opinion paper, but as long as you sort of couch it that way, right? If you are a news organization, you cannot be one big editorial. You cannot be one big opinion page.
Right.
And actually, you mentioned Fox News. I think Fox News actually does a really good job during the daytime of balancing their coverage.
Okay.
I think there are some really great journalists, and some of that daytime programming is right down the middle. I don't think a lot of people see that.
I say that's not coming up on the TikTok stuff.
Right.
It's not
it's not what gets the clicks, right?
Right.
I think a lot of the evening programming on MSNBC, on Fox, to very different networks, you're getting the kind of opinions that you would expect. But I think it's so important for these organizations, and NBC News does a good job of this, our affiliate, of presenting things in an unbiased way, letting the viewer decide, letting the people at home watching this decide based on the facts.
Yeah, no, very
That's
true.
the goal, right?
Yeah. So speaking of the election, obviously there's a national election, but we've got a lot of stuff on the ballot here in Washington and Seattle. So how are you going to approach covering that on the news?
Yeah, we have our own independent polls.
Okay.
We've partnered with the Seattle Times and UW to do our Survey USA polls on basically all of the races, all of the initiatives. We asked a lot about voter trust in our election process and those kinds of things. So we've done a lot of our own polling, which has been really insightful for a lot of this. Frankly, it's really spot on too. In the last election, our polling was pretty spot on. And so we've made it a point for every day, at least on the show that I oversee in the morning, to really dig into each issue, whether it was the initiative on the capital gains tax or the climate initiative, the race for governor, trying to deep dive on all of these. And so giving everybody an informed menu of things to choose from. We have our King 5 voter guide. Of all the things we do in journalism, I think that elections is one of the most important.
Yeah.
And I think it's because it falls into that public service basket. I think weather coverage, as dramatized as you may feel it may be, elections coverage, this is all about the public service. This is kind of why we're here. And so I bring that up to my team all the time. This is our duty to do these things. Elections, it's so important to what we do. So we're spending a lot of time on it for sure.
I agree. So
kind of an important time.
Yeah, a little
kind
bit.
of busy.
I know this worked out well that you're on this week. I also wanted to ask about, I've worked in a newspaper too, but there's this. Do you do a story because it's going to have the higher ratings? We talked about, kind of some dramatic stories. Or do you do a story that you think is important for the people to hear? Because sometimes I think it's up against each other. I'm lucky enough that, I run this. I get to choose whatever stories I want. And some of them, may not get as much attention, but it's a story that I want to tell. how much control do you have over what stories you're telling? Are you having those conversations of like, what's going to get the most viewers? How do you balance that?
For sure. I've done several stories that I think were just going to be great and were really important to me, and it turns out nobody cared. So we're not going to do that again.
Yeah.
But this day and age, we actually have a lot of data in terms of what people watch. We have more data and an understanding of viewer habits more than ever, and so we'll use that data a lot to determine what people care about, what people are clicking on, what they're spending more time on. That informs a lot of our editorial decisions. There's the public service basket, like I mentioned. Some things, I don't care if everybody doesn't watch. If it's important that we get this out to the public, we're going to put it on.
Yeah.
And I think there's all of us, we have a very, very experienced newsroom that understands the pulse of the community, what people might care about, what people are talking about in their social circles outside of the newsroom. Bring that into the newsroom. Let's talk about what viewers might be thinking. On a morning show that I'm on, it's about what you're going to get your day started, right? I mean,
which
news,
I will say, I watched your show, and the whiplash sometimes, because it's your job, but like. They're talking about a homicide, and then, a few minutes later, it's like Happy Cat Day, which is like, that is your job, but that must be really hard to, kind of change your tone on there.
Yeah. Happy Cat Day was a tough one for me. I'm not a cat guy. But yeah, it is a little more whiplash in the morning because it's a lot quicker, right? I mean, people get up and they're trying to get their day started. There's not a lot of time to sit and absorb a story. And so we're go. And that's why news, weather, and traffic are our big two. Weather is huge for us. People want to know what's going on. So those are the things that we prioritize.
Well, so speaking of kind of a little bit behind the scenes with you, do you have any funny story of like, I mean, because you're live, like I have an audio engineer, I can edit if I mess up, but like, I just remember have you seen that TikTok video where he says panties instead of pantries?
Oh, God. That is one of many great bloopers out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Has anything happened? Any fun behind the scenes?
My partner, Mimi Jung, and I, co-anchor, we have done so many great stories. I have so many moments with Mimi, and some of them lose a lot in the telling, but we're both very busy in our off time with our kids and our schedules. The school bell rings at a time we've got to be home. And so if we're out shooting stories together, we have an off time, very hard out. And so we do a special in a series called 5 Cities, 5 Days, where we'll occasionally go out to these cities, kind of profile these towns. And we did Vashon Island one time on a 5 Islands, 5-day segment. And we had to shoot this, get off the ferry, go shoot it in 30 minutes, and fly back and catch the next ferry boat.
My gosh.
And we were dying laughing because you're just fumbling over yourself, rushing to try to shoot this story, conducting interviews in like 10 minutes. And so we were laughing to tears a few times kind of at ourselves. Like, what are we doing? This is crazy.
Ridiculous.
The amount of work that goes into some of these stories.
I know. I bet. Well, I hope we come out with like a bloopers reel because I would love to watch that.
We should totally do
I know. That. Okay, so we're going to move into our next topic, which is Jeff Bezos pulling the Washington Post endorsement. This does kind of tie into the conversation we were just having. But like a quick recap, I feel like a lot of people have heard about this, but 11 days before the election, Jeff Bezos says, we're not endorsing a candidate. It looks like they were going to endorse Kamala Harris. He's the owner. He says, not happening. This is the first time in, I think, 36 years since they've endorsed somebody. The former Washington Post editor says it's cowardice. More than 200,000 people have pulled their subscription. 2 columnists resigned, and 1 writer stepped down from the editorial board. So a lot of people are upset about this. I also want to kind of talk about his article. I'll link that here too. But his statement. Some people were saying that Dave Limp, the CEO of Bezos's Blue Origin company, had a meeting with Trump on the same day that he decided to pull this.
Right.
So
not a good look.
Right?
Not a good look.
A lot of people are saying like, okay, you're protecting yourself because Blue Origin does a lot of work with the government.
Right.
And so he's basically, like, if Trump wins, he doesn't want Trump to not work with him because he endorsed Kamala, right? That's the speculation.
Well, and remember, too, they did a endorsement in 2016 and in 2020 and in 2022. So what is it about 2024, right? Why that now? And, of course, people start thinking about, well, what's in it for Jeff Bezos? He's never done this before. Some theories, although Jeff denies this in the letter that he wrote that you just mentioned, SpaceX is kicking Blue Origin's butt in the space race. And so you start thinking, well, maybe Elon Musk does have a lot to consider if Trump is president. How many contracts will they be giving Elon in his trip to Mars he wants to take.
Yeah.
That certainly has to be a part of the equation. Is it the same for Blue Origin? You don't want to tick off the guy who's going to be the next president. So that's a theory. Bezos, the headline of that article is people don't trust journalists anymore. Sadly, he's right. And it's unfortunate because journalists, as we mentioned, should be neutral. And when so many of them decide to inject their own opinions into their daily news, it gets a lot of us in trouble. Mm-hmm. And so his thought was that we're not going to do a quid pro quo, as he said, quote unquote. So I don't know. Who knows? There is no evidence that truly shows that newspaper endorsements in this day and age have an effect on anything.
Yeah.
So there's that. It used to be more so, right? Like when my dad was a newspaper publisher, it was a huge deal. What's the newspaper going to say? Because they're the most informed. They have the most facts. They didn't have the internet. And so all the news went through the newsroom. And it was just a different time then. But now everyone kind of has their own facts, their own truth, their own research. It just makes it difficult.
Sure, yeah. I know a couple people that use The Stranger and vote pretty much aligned with what The Stranger vote. So I do think there's people that are looking to the newspaper. And then there's also like, we don't want to give our opinion, go find your own. But if you're going to find your own, I'm going to the newspaper, right? Like this is me finding my own opinions, is understanding what you think as, you in the newspaper think.
Yeah, quite the opposite in the Seattle Times, right? Which their endorsement for Kamala was hell yes, quote unquote.
Really?
So very different than the Jeff Bezos endorsement revoke.
Yeah, I think I was texting a couple of journalist friends, and some of the response was, it's about the endorsement, but it's also about the overreach of power. And if he can pull this endorsement, what else can he do as an owner? Mm-hmm. And typically owners aren't in charge of those kinds of decisions. It's a newspaper, it's an editorial board. So I think there's a little fear there of how much more power do they have and effect.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting. You ask yourself that too. Then you think, well, these billionaires, they're supposed to be the big leaders. They're the pinnacle of success, so to speak. They should be setting the example, right, of making endorsements. That's the belief of some. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting issue. It'd be at the USA Today, Gannett, they decided not to do endorsements too. So makes you wonder if we'll start to see the dominoes fall.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say on this is I'm kind of skeptical on Bezos's letter, because he was saying, I didn't even know they were meeting. And I was like, you didn't know your CEO is meeting with Trump 11 days before the election. I have a hard time believing that, but that's what he said.
He's in Miami. He has his personal trainer now. I don't know if he's paying attention.
He's busy. The other thing is saying, I wish we would have made this change earlier. I'm like, well, you could have. Like, there's no way you're just like, hey, guys, I have an idea.
Right.
Let's not do this.
Right.
So
I had the endorsement written up, ready to go. They just didn't hit send.
Like, I'm sure anyway. So I'm a little skeptical on his note, but that is, I'll link it in here. You guys can decide on your own. Anything else you want to say about this one?
No, I would just say, for good reason, endorsements from newspapers have been revered over the years because these are great journalists, and I think we should trust their opinions. We should trust their view on the world. And I applaud any newspaper, any publication that decides to take a stand on things like that, as long as it's in the opinion section. Yeah,
good point. Okay, our next article is that a CEO is accused of fraud, and he skips his court date. So Stephen, I couldn't remember if we'd covered this on this podcast before, but Alex Halverson broke this story when he was over at Puget Sound Business Journal. But Stephen is a 69-year-old guy. He starts a company called S-Ray, and it claimed to have developed an ultrasound device that could replace the invasive X-ray technology specifically for dentists. So he first started it in Portland, and then he moved it over to Seattle. And basically, he defrauded 200 investors of about $11 million because there was no actual product. He barely had a mock-up. Like, it wasn't a thing. Yeah. It feels very Elizabeth Holmes-esque. Mm-hmm. A really great idea, really great salesperson, doesn't have a product after
that. Was the first thing I thought when I saw this story was Elizabeth Holmes.
Right? I know. Yeah. Which I think I've said this before, is like, respect. Like, the fact that you can raise $11 million with nothing. Right. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's a classic fraud story.
I know. And then, of course, he buys a $1 million home. He buys a Porsche. He's, spending the money. And so the story that came out, this happened a long time, last year? The story that came out is that he was supposed to show up for his court date. He was facing up to 7 years in prison. Mm-hmm. He was going to have to pay back the $10 million-ish, 10, 11. And he doesn't show up, which is like, okay, now he's a warrant's out for his arrest.
Red flag.
Then you sent me an article that you saw about the latest news.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like his body was found near his home in Oregon. So they have not released a cause of death, but the pressure was on. They were on to him. Fraud charges were filed. I mean, like you said, there is a level of respect, right, for someone who's able to raise funds. I mean, respect in the sense that you're a salesperson, right? A good salesperson.
For sure.
As sick as that may be. I mean, my first thought too was if anything they could do to get rid of those X-rays at the dentist too, having to open your mouth and jam that in there. There's got to be technology.
I think that's probably what he was playing off of, everyone's emotion. Being
Right.
like, oh, this is great. Please get rid of this.
Yeah,
I hate it.
I thought that first thing. And he's also done this before. This is not his first round with Johnny Law in terms of fraud charges.
Oh,
so, and he had a court date for that particular charge 10 years ago or so. Also did not show.
Oh.
And so, he has a history of these kinds of no-show appearances. So it's really sad for his family and anyone who knew him that may have lost someone that they love or know. But man, it's just taking advantage of people, preying on, people who trust you. And that's sad.
Yeah. And like you said, they haven't released the cause of death. I think we can speculate that he took his own life, but, which is again, very, very sad. So
at his ranch that he purchased with all of this money.
Right. Yes. Do you cover fraud stories?
Not a lot. I mean, we cover quite a few business stories. I can think of a few fraud cases here locally that we touched on, but in TV news there tend to be not very visual stories, so they're difficult to tell in TV news. More of a newspaper story. The Seattle Times is doing a great job with this one.
Yeah, very true. Okay, anything else?
No, I would just say, don't lie to people.
Yeah. Good advice, Jake. Good advice. Okay, our next article is Boeing workers deny offer. So I almost covered this story last week, I think it was, because Boeing had this offer and people thought they were going to take it. And so I was like, well, I don't want to cover it if they don't actually take it, but they probably will. I'll wait and see. Boeing machinists have rejected the deal. So it's been a 6-week strike, and about 33,000 members of the International Association of Machinists, which represents about half of Boeing's workforce, has been on strike. Now, their demand, the biggest demand, I think it's a list of different things, but the biggest one is a 40% increase in wages over 4 years and the return of pensions. Boeing came back and offered one thing and was rejected by like 96% of the people. They're like, this is a horrible deal. No, thank you. Boeing's like, okay, let me try again. Offer them another thing, which is 35% instead of the 35% wage increase for workers and some retirement benefits, but not all of what they wanted.
Big signing bonus.
Oh, was it?
And a big signing bonus too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then they were like, no.
It's the pension. It's the pension plan.
I think it's the pension. I think you're right. But it was interesting that 64% rejected this time. So the first time, 96% of them were like, absolutely not. And now 64% are rejecting this. So still more than half, but yeah.
And that 64% down from 95%. My sense is, and my sense from talking to some of these machinists is, this is a very stressful time. Mm-hmm. You're not getting a paycheck. You don't have health insurance. If you're an older machinist and you don't rely quite as much on the pension in your final years of employment, you can kind of put your foot down and make a statement, which is exactly what they're doing. This is a statement that the machinists are making. And to get this kind of a vote to hold up production at such a massive company like Boeing, this is the punishment phase that they're holding against Boeing. But if you're a younger machinist and you have all of these years that you could earn money through a pension program and save for your retirement, you may be one of those 30% who voted yes, let's wrap this up. And so it's a really emotional time. The story is it's sad in a lot of ways. Yeah, we've been covering it extensively. Yeah. I was actually up at Boeing yesterday, and it's a really eerie sight.
What's the feeling when you're there?
Well, first of all, there's uncompleted, unfinished airplane after airplane after airplane just sitting tip to tip, jammed in as much as close as they can. Out here in the port down here in Seattle, the fuselages are getting off of the container ships, and there's no one to unload them when they get to the factory. So they're sitting here at the port. They're stacking up one by one. And that is juxtaposed in the foreground by this corner where there are striking picket lines and there are tents, abandoned tents, trash everywhere. There's no machinist to be found because you can't sit out there for 7 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
And so there's unfinished airplanes. It's like a ghost town. You have these corners that are just covered in trash, frankly, where these machinists post occasionally to hold their picket signs. It's reminiscent of the leave the lights on moment back in the 70s at Boeing when the company was facing bankruptcy. And so this is a time where who knows how this is going to end. As a company, it's difficult to reinstate a pension plan. But boy, they're digging in their heels, the machinists. They need something, and it speaks a lot of our time too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when I've covered this, you talk about how Boeing is losing money, like in the billions.
Bleeding.
And they're bleeding
Heavily.
money. They have this debt. They're not doing well. But then I think you have these workers being like, yeah, but this contract was 2016. We're not making very much money. You're paying your executives millions of dollars.
Right.
So we don't care that you're in debt. And so I wish I had the actual like budget and the actual dollars of what they can and can't do.
It's incredible. Yeah.
But,
The amount of money that that Boeing goes through. I mean, the amount of money that goes into an airplane from the moment they have the bright idea and begin the engineering to the moment when they deliver their first airplane, it's in the billions of dollars in research and development. And they work in like 20 years increments, right? And so bottom line is they're not making airplanes today, and that's how they make their money.
Yeah.
And you've got airlines like American and Delta and Alaska are saying, we need airplanes. And so where are they going to go? People are worried they're going to go to Airbus. The future of this company is really unknown.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you had to make a guess, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that Boeing will get the 40 and everything they wanted? I don't know.
It's so hard to say because both sides are digging in so deeply right now. There has to be some kind of a compromise, right? There has to be clearly a retirement savings plan is important to these machinists, as it should be. Obviously, it's not to pay a 40% raise. I don't know about you, but a 40% raise might be welcome, right? I mean, a lot of people would love a 40% raise right now. So my guess is they'll figure something out in the next few weeks from this taping. And so my hope is before Thanksgiving, before the holidays, everybody can kind of get back to work.
Yeah, I hope that too.
Yeah. It's an important company for the Northwest.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, our last story is about a new soccer team coming to Ballard. It's a semi-professional women's team. And I was able to get a friend on the phone, Jen Barnes. If you're an OG listener, you'll remember her. She's the owner and founder of Rough and Tumble in Ballard, which is a women's sports pub, but they play all sports. They just prioritize women's sports. So I asked her 2 questions. I asked her why have multiple owners, as she is one of the owners of this new team. And the other one was why she got involved. So let's take a listen to what she had to say.
I think having multiple owners is a really smart move, especially from a team perspective. And it made a lot of sense for us. First and foremost, it spreads the financial investment out across multiple people. But I think the more important part is that it allows you to leverage the influence that the different owners have. So in our case, there's 3 different ownership groups. One is a group of fantastic Seattle business women leaders. One is a group of Storm owners. And one is the group that I'm in. And that includes some of the sort of face and brand and influence of the group as well. So it includes 3 NWSL players, and that's the first time that NWSL players who are currently playing have invested in an active USL team. So that's really exciting. It includes Lou Barnes, who's our team captain at the Reign, Olivia Vanderyacht, born and raised Seattle, fantastic soccer player, and Jess Fishlock, who is one of the OGs, if you will. She, Lou Barnes, and Megan Rapinoe have been part of the Reign since the very beginning. So it felt really apt for them to be involved in this. Our group also includes a just retired Sounder player, Kellen Rowe, which there's a number of Sounders players involved in Ballard FC. So that was a nice alignment. And then Michelle Ludke, who is a well-known sports broadcaster here. So I think we have a really strong representation of women leaders and women owners and women's voices on this team. What made me decide to do it? It was sort of a no-brainer. It was an easy yes. So Sam Zizat, the co-founder and president of Ballard FC, came to me just a couple weeks after Rough and Tumble opened and said, hey, we're about a year away, but this is something that we're looking at doing and we'd really love to have you involved. And I said yes right then. I wasn't quite ready to financially do that from the perspective of Rough and Tumble had only been open a couple of weeks, but I knew that we were going to get there. And so we kept talking and came back this year to bring it to life. And it's just been, it's been one of the best things that I've done yet. I'm really, really excited to bring opportunities for women to develop in soccer at a level that is beyond high school and college. And right now, Seattle has not had that. So we're able to bring this first opportunity to the city.
Okay, so you heard Jen Barnes talk about the why have multiple owners? Why was that important? And how kind of groundbreaking that is that we haven't had players have ownership of another team. She mentions Ballard FC. So Ballard FC is the men's team. Have you gone to their game?
Yeah, no, I've never been to one yet. Yeah,
Okay,
I don't know why. I don't know why I've never gone to one. I was listening to her and her excitement. I'm thinking, I got to get more of these games.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ballard FC is the men's team. That started in 2022. And I knew, like, a friend of a friend was talking about how they ordered merch, and they ordered merch for the whole season. And they said they sold out of the merch within something like the first 2 games or something. They were wildly more popular.
They're the champions. They won last year.
Yeah.
Won the champions. They're in second this year. So people are just loving this team.
People are into it. And so, so the news article came out. This was in the works. We knew that this team was coming. It's the women's side of it. So it's kind of a sister team. And they announced their branding. So it's Salmon Bay FC.
That's so cool.
And they released the kind of some merch that you can buy. They play in Inner Bay. And tryouts are December 28th. So any soccer people out there,
there you go.
I should start training. What's really cool is that they've sold more than 600 season tickets already, and they're just wildly successful before they've even had a game. What else to say? Oh, the season starts May to July. Anything else stood out to you in your research?
You know, one of the first things I thought of was, first of all, Salmon Bay FC. What a cool name.
Yeah.
I mean, you're representing such a historic part of Seattle. Another thought I had was just the rise in women's sports. It's so inspiring to see, right? I mean, of course, you have Sue Bird, you've got Megan Rapinoe, all that they've done for Seattle sports, and now Caitlin Clark, and in this social media age, and all of these clips, and just the way that she's able to really drive the culture. I just am so inspired by it. As the father of a little girl, a 12-year-old who's in sports herself, I just love this kind of stuff. And it's good for Seattle. We have every single team you can even imagine in every sport right now, other than NBA, which is coming. But to see this, I just can't wait to go see a game. I don't know why I haven't been to a Ballard game yet, FC, but I love going to the Sounders. I love the rain games. So this is going to be on my list.
Yeah, I think there was some concern of, we don't even have, we have people going to the rain game, but we don't have enough, some people say.
Yeah.
And so there's this concern of, are we really going to have another women's team that might pull? In my opinion, I don't think it's going to pull. I think the people that want to go to the rain game will go to the rain game, and they may also go to a Salmon Bay game. There's also going to be people, going to Lumen Field is a big to do. There's people that don't live close. There's how expensive it can be. But to just pop over to Inner Bay, if you live over in Ballard, I think that's going to attract even more people to the sport and more people to women's sports specifically.
Well, I think expectations are not as high too when you're in the USLW league. I think it's it's obviously not a rec league. It's very competitive, but I think it's maybe casual's the right word. Right?
Yeah.
There's not as much pressure as a professional sort of OL Reign team or the Sounders. It's just about the spirit of the game.
And
I think that's where this is born. This is born out of that.
When I was at one of the games, it definitely feels, back in the day when you used to go to like the high school games, or I'm not saying that they're at that level. They're very high level players, but it just feels more like you're with your friends after school going to a soccer game, or I don't know.
Like a concert or something.
Yeah,
concert
it just felt a little more neighborhoody for some reason.
Seattle is so perfect for that kind of environment too. Just impromptu gatherings. We're pretty good at that around here. The soccer culture in Seattle is awesome. You know, rough and tumble and Ballard, like you said, she's one of the owners. I think they're going to be really successful. They have 6 in the Northwest Division. It made sense. They had 5 in their little division. Now there's 6, so they'll be competitive.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So speaking of sports, I know we've got World Cup coming in 2026.
Yes.
Is there anything you want to say about that? I know, are you guys covering that?
Yeah, 2025, we're expecting to see some fan experiences. We don't quite yet know what that's going to be, but the USA, Team USA, guaranteed a game in Seattle at Lumen Field. I'm curious to see what the ticket prices are going to be, to be honest. I mean, it's a pretty decent capacity. It's not like some of the world's biggest soccer stadiums or anything. So I think they could be pretty pricey, but I'm hoping they make it accessible to everybody. It's the World Cup.
I know. I interviewed Troy Anderson with Visit Seattle, and he was telling me that he was trying to understand the impact of World Cup. Like, what is that going to do in terms of tourism and taxes and the money, and like, what should we be prepared for? Like, he's like, is it like the Super Bowl? And I guess they told him, yes, but every single game will be like the Super Bowl.
Right.
In terms of impact and size and everything.
The whole world
it's going to be, it's going to be really good for Seattle's economy, but also just for all the fans. Yeah,
Seattle is so close to being an international city. I think a lot of, if you're in the transportation sector, they say it's about trains. If Seattle gets the mass transportation down, you can check that box to be an international city. And I think adding a World Cup to your resume is going to put Seattle on the map even more.
I know. I'm excited. Anything else, sports? you want to say?
No, I would say we are so close to seeing the Sonics back in town.
You think so?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the NBA has made it clear they're going to start exploring the expansion teams.
Okay.
In the coming years, the hunger, the thirst for an NBA team is definitely here. So I'm hoping to be taking my son and daughter to an NBA game in maybe the next 4 or 5 years. That'll be great. And will they name it the Sonics? They have to name it the Sonics.
I feel like they should, right?
Name it the Sonics. Yeah.
I bet. Okay, Jake, one more question for you. Sure. And then it is Halloween. So one more. And then you have a Halloween party, right?
Yeah, we're hosting a bunch of Care Bears, my daughter and all her friends. So,
that's awesome. Yeah. I'm going to Goodwill and I'm going to pray to the Goodwill gods that the vision I have in my head is going to work out and everything's going to be there. But
there you go.
We'll see.
Masquerade, the costume shop in Redmond, too. It's a good place. Yeah,
okay.
Masquerade's awesome.
I'll check that out. So my last question for you is, what's the best advice you've ever received, or what advice do you have for the listeners today?
Seek luck.
Seek
luck. Put yourself in a position for the miracle to happen. If we just sit around on our couch and do nothing, those opportunities are not going to come. I just think about a lot of the times in my life and my career that I fought and worked so hard for something I didn't even know was there. You have to put yourself in these positions for that miracle to happen. Seek out a chance for that good fortune to come. Seek out those opportunities. Have yourself in a position, because when that opportunity does come, if you're not there to take it, it's not going to happen. So I tell my kids that all the time. And our family motto is work hard, play hard. And I think it falls in that same bucket. Work hard. Even if you don't know where you're going, do things, try things, read things. You never know when that next opportunity is going to come. So seek out a chance to put yourself in a position for that miracle to happen. It's going to happen.
I love that. That's such an inspiring way to end this episode. So thank you so much for hosting, and thanks for sitting down with me.
Thanks, Rachel.
This has been The Weekly, with production assistance from Nick Patry. If you liked what you heard, rate us and write a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. We love listener feedback, so if you have any story suggestions, comments, or complaints, email us at info@theweeklyseattle.com. Make sure to check back next Sunday for the latest local business news. We'll see you next time.